humiliation of that experience. And one of the reasons I wrote this book is because I felt that a certain experience of humiliation, and maybe that accounts for its brutality, is not often written about, or certainly not written about enough. And an experience that is incredibly widespread. Social humiliation, the sense that you don't speak the correct language or you don't speak it correctly. The fact that you're poor, your family has been poor, or they belong to the wrong class, what is the wrong class. That oppresses people to a degree. I think so much of contemporary fiction and nonfiction, in my experience at least, doesn't capture that. And the piece I want to read is about a young man who is growing up in these, I think in circumstances that might seem poor from a distance, but actually, I think he's much better off than the people living around him. His family is much better off, and he's in fact got a pathway to a wider world, which is that he has been chosen to be, or he's been accepted at the prestigious technology institute, which is for many people in India a kind of pathway to glory and fame and wealth here in the United States and elsewhere. So he knows that life is going to work out for him. And the passage that I read describes him returning to his hometown, where he's already spending a lot of time away, and he's already kind of planning to move away from this past of his. For 2 years before I got into IIT and left my childhood home for good, I attended coaching classes in Delhi. Like Asim and Virendra, I always returned home with a growing dread of what I would find there. How agonizingly vivid are those scenes from the 1980s, in which I find some clues for later conduct. The train from Old Delhi station, obstinately fuming and grinding across the plains of Punjab and Haryana, reaches Delhi about 5 in the morning. Narrow, roofless platforms hurtle past the windows of my second-class unreserved carriage all night, the wind through the bars blowing coal dust in my hair. When the train stops, I see a dimly lit station platform where coolies prowl, always in twos, ready to rush the rare alighting passenger, ready to roll their scarves into a circular pad on their head and receive a metal trunk on this impromptu cushion before mincingly walking away into the night. From somewhere comes the clatter of an iron cart and the clank and dong of a hammer testing wheel. Shadowy people pass it will never be seen or well. One of them turns halfway around, but only to squirt a tremendous spit of fine juice onto the floor. Then with several hisses, the coach lurches off, passing the signalman holding up a lantern, his face fiendish in the trembling green glow, and a small low building housing a row of movers. I sit on a straight-backed wooden bench, wedged in between several people and facing a similarly tense row on the opposite side, with sinking heads jerking up and then again starting to slowly sink. In the bunk above me, the faint yellowish light of the lamps exposes a jumble of half-slumbering bodies, with mouths agape like fish. Sometimes I doze off, but the train whistles with piercing melancholy, stutters over a level crossing, roars into a loud tunnel. The metal window shutter starts clattering in its frame, or the man next to me, sitting hunched over, his big strong nose snoring softly and giving off a thick smell of sweat, suddenly slumps onto my lap. My whole body goes tense, I want so badly to stretch my legs and put my feet onto something. And in that state of immobility, I become convinced that happiness will always be beyond my reach. Delhi has no railway yard worth speaking of, only a few condemned carriages and wagons and locomotives of crumpled iron on a couple of sidings. There is one platform with a small roof, under which stands a stone building painted with striped white and brown. It accommodates station master's office and a stall from which my father sells tea, samosa, sliced white bread, biscuits, hard-boiled eggs, pan, and cigarettes. At daybreak, men and women are sleeping everywhere on the pan-stained floor, draped head to toe in white. The white always shocking, the color of death and mourning, under urgently spinning door panels. Imagine me alighting into this haven for the destitute, walking through the anonymous white bundles, past the dogs that are beginning to bleat and moan, through a muddy forecourt of two-wheeled Tonga cycle rickshaws and bullock carts, and an open refuse heap with stray cows timidly pillage, shifting a hoof now and then, their skin twitching. In a narrow dirt lane stands the barracks for railway workers, their walls plastered with drying cargan cakes and broken furniture spilled across the small yards before every room. Underneath, clothes lines laden with washing, crucifixes of shirts with waterlogged sleeves, 5 pounds of crooked, wrung-out saris, strong chickens splash the earth, and only the occasional glow of tulsi in old dalga tins speak of a feeling for order and the vanity of function. At this time in the morning, cooking fires from a meaty rise in fine columns of the blue sky. In our own little yard, a cow stands nibbling under a rough lean-to, roofed with thatch, over fresh ordure humming with garnet green flies. She's tightly leashed to an iron stake so that she can't reach either a small cabbage and tomato patch on the black pot over the brazier, in which my mother cooked every morning and afternoon, squatting on the tiny veranda, made by the overhang of the roof, the anchor of a sari spilling over into the gravel. Our home is a small courtyard with beige-colored walls and 2 high and narrow windows that lashlessly squint out at the yard. There is no furniture, apart from an iron chest in one corner and a pile of mattresses of coarse coconut fiber on the red concrete floor. One wall has inset shelves painted green and enameled tumblers, steel plates, and 4 china cups. The white trophy is monogrammed with a steam engine that proclaims India's national motto, Satyame Jayate, truth alone triumph. The only item of luxury in the room, which is carefully preserved, for it was stolen early in my father's career from Indian Railways. Next to the shelves from a woven bag hangs against the wall. A copper string stands in one corner above a short-handled broom. Dust adheres to all the moldings of the doors. It has turned stringy with cobwebs dangling from the corners of the naked galvanized roof and stained grey glazed with the ceiling tile. The walls glow in greenish shades of mold after every monsoon season, and the room is as chilly and damp in winter as it is warm and humid in summer. In that totally, where I seem to have lived for eternity, it is impossible to imagine a future for myself that might be different. We're going to find another place in the book to read from, which is reads from a bit where the narrator is finally abandoning his town, going away with his mother, and leaving it forever. He has already moved to a small town in the mountains, very different from a place we grew up in, a place we genuinely love. Um, but it's, oh, sorry. I thought it was actually one. So he's just been told that his father has left his mother and that she's been completely abandoned and she's at home. And so he then goes back to um, meet her and to take her to this new place that he's moved to. Um, I opened the latest letter somewhat wearily, find that my sister had written it, informing me in two terse paragraphs that her father had left her mother for another woman, and urging me to return home as soon as possible, since she could not leave the business home. A strange memory flitted through my mind as I stood there stunned, the flimsy blue sheet with the impatient thorn flaps in my hand. My father, bringing a chipped white tumbler of fresh warm milk in his mouth, half closing his eyes, his thick, cracked lips rest on the brim to assess the temperature and gently blow. Finally, he sips his breakfast with closed eyes, his broad, truly handsome face deeply at peace. I had neither witnessed nor dared to imagine other hungers that drove this man. My mother could never bring herself to disclose how he had tired submissive femininity. I learned later from my sister that he had conducted a long affair with the widowed daughter of a local shopkeeper and moved in with her as soon as her father died. He now ran the shop with his new campaign. From Old Delhi railway station, where the rolling crowds over footbridges seemed always on the verge of stampede, I took the night train, heedlessly reprising all my journeys home. Diesel engine pulled the train now, but the unreserved second-class carriages seethed with sweaty and drowsy men. Hole in the toilet floor, dully drowsed, while ceiling lamps burned as weakly as ever, and golden sparks still rushed backward in the blue light. When I opened my eyes from the brief nap early in the morning, the ground seemed dizzyingly be rushing past in the opposite direction. In the dawn's ash-pale light, I disembarked from the train and walked, still disoriented, through the white-shrouded bodies on the platform floor, my mother in the house abandoned by her husband. Exhausted from grief and sleepless nights, her frail body heaved with sobs as she clung to me in that fleshy embrace of hers. Everything around me in my relinquished home seemed the same as ever, only shabbier and smaller, more smeared and chipped. Yet, walking away from the bottle of thumbs up in the empty room, where I had known the helpless sensation of being trapped forever, and where everything had long since grown old and outlived itself, I found myself breathing. I felt full of mourning at that time when I was betting and supported by the possibility of a bright expanse of life. I was now going to meet my mother unexpectedly beside me, that open and mysterious future in the future. But as the Tonga lurched out of the rutted lane, the bells of a horse's neck emitting a hollow din, the tarmac road below the flickering woods began to flow. A past in which hope was abundant seemed to be sliding away from me. The other bits I'm going to choose is something completely different setting. The narrator finds himself in London, a place that he's only visited in the past. Now he's come to be there with his very young girl, and he's describing this very strange world that he finds himself in. We worked in the mornings and afternoons in separate rooms until we needed help with your book. We made love a lot, often during the afternoon, starting with the most fleeting of touches. And though it was not the same, the early excitement and joy were gone. Holding me closer still made me feel that my arms had been empty for too long. In the evenings, we went to dinner parties and films. We attended book launches. And these outings were preceded by the spectacle I never ceased to relish, of you before wardrobe and mirror, dreamily fine-tuning your appearance. After dinner somewhere, initially at some white draped top table with napkin pyramids in a restaurant freshly recommended by the Evening Standard, where waiters opened menus as gingerly as an antiquarian bookseller I knew in Shimla exhibited an overpriced edition. Until, in an awkward but necessary conversation, I reminded you that I was comfortably off only by Indian standards. You will take an Uber back, suddenly niche now in its darkness, as you check your social media feed. Often the first reports of the events he had just attended, the loud colors from your screen flowing across your face, with eager intent always made me a good challenge. To emerge from the car in your streets, the private gardens with high railings on one side and glowing French windows on another, to open the blue front door of your apartment and hear it shut behind us with the oily click of an expensive lock, to then find ourselves subtly lit in amber with a tall blue framed wall mirror and hear the grandfather's clock ticking vigilantly, what you want to hear from the world. At a time when so many of my thoughts and memories were shaded by sorrow and guilt, your old apartment in Kensington, home to several generations of family, and still suggesting in its renovated state all the great many things said and done inside it, became a kind of reassurance. The space and order and light of the vast, high-ceilinged rooms, suggesting a durable fastness against death and separation. During those long London twilights, the windows of even the homes of strangers showcased the reality that seemed to have stood firm and eternal for centuries. A woman lying in an armchair holding a glass of white wine, children reading or playing or drawing, a man taking off his tie, and a cat crawling out between roped back curtains to lounge flatly on a sill. Coming from a society drenched by anarchic poverty and cruelty, where you could never feel history to be on your side or any institution of government and law working in your favor. Coming from a society that has frightened and traumatized so many of us for life, I was learning how to appreciate, or at least not be afraid of, a rich and steadfast world. Then too, we avoided living in that part of London, the journeys to terraces of brick, fast boarded up shops, cardboard dwellers, and iPhone statues. Seems to me of a larger dereliction up north, the deindustrialized country about which I knew nothing, except that it had sprung Brexit upon unsuspecting Londoners. How much easier it was in that uncompromisingly fashion and reassuringly expensive watering hole of Russian and Asian oligarchs, where the destitute, unlike India's, slumped in doorways, nearly always out of sight, to enjoy the city's array of parks, restaurants, and bookshops. To experience even things abandoning the pavement, disemboweled sofas, collapsed hoovers, computer keyboards, as a kind of visual novelty. How lightly our legs skip to the devout row shoed on the pavement outside the mosque in Southport, where we had ventured to get the fix of basic food at a restaurant serving authentically Gujarati cuisine. And how brave was the security of the rich tourists that I felt in the sweet shop with the garlanded portrait of Modi. The security that those raving about kebab dives and Sufi shrines in seedy old Delhi, my old workplace, always knew. I didn't have to worry anymore about the Indian toilet cleaners at Future. Like a scene in a street at the Pierre in New York, I had been elevated above the meanness that was the fate of most immigrants to that city. And unlike them, I had in mind the comforting knowledge that I could go back, that I didn't have to after all people. I envied your intimacy with the city, the confident way you placed yourself in it and professed metropolitan habits. Let's meet at my regular, the LRB bookshop. Unconsciously trying to imitate you, I often found myself making observations that struck my own ears as effective, such as the best coffee roasters are in Shoreditch. And I also suppressed the things that puzzle me, black white coffee, rare and expensive in my mind, available at Tube Station Florida. And the numerous white young men with thick Scottish beards and hats who seemed clones of Renwo and Manet. I reignited my love of London buses that have blurted out, seen from the top deck, above its chaos of terraces, trestles, and squares. The city revealed at last the order that V.S. Naipaul relentlessly contraposed in the disorder of India. The solid edifices of brick and steel, well-swept roads, the spiked iron railings, the clusters of chimney pots, the symmetrical spans of the bridges over the Thames, and the long shopping streets, where, as though in a film, buildings, billboards, and display windows floated by, and miniature figures dashed about on the pavement. I discovered too the joys of wandering through the free museums, those oases of warmth and color. On my first visit to London, there was so much I had missed while trying to save money. And now I availed myself for all the amenities denied to me by rural retreat, from mingling at a cafe with a cappuccino and shopping at Whole Foods, to watching a Sutton Ray retrospective at the South Bank, listening to music in Wigmore Hall, and luxuriating later in your fast out of farm.
So we can, yes, Q&A time. Who's got any questions? Here we go.
Hi. Oh, is that loud? Everybody hears me? Too much? Okay. Hi, and thank you so much for reading and for speaking with the MFA students beforehand as well. In our conversation before this, you mentioned that the direct address, like second person aspect of the novel was something you added structurally later on in the process. And that made me wonder, and we talked a little bit about why you did that, but was there anything that was lost in that translation and like turning it into that form? Is there anything that you missed about maybe what it looked like before? Yeah.
Actually, no, I think I gained a lot more than I lost. I'm sure I lost. But I think the problem of making this particular very reticent man erupt into speech, that was a problem I couldn't figure out. So I wrote a large part of the book in the first person, and then was continuously haunted by the feeling that this is not working because he is portrayed in the book in the narrative as this quiet, unassuming person, and someone who is not prone to narrate his life in this way. So how come he's so articulate? How come he's so, all-seeing and perceptive? And why is he doing this? All these questions, which were then answered, and certainly the problems were resolved once I decided that, okay, he's going to address a large part of his narrative to someone whom he has wronged and who also has been treated terribly badly by another friend. So I felt like, in the end, I gained by transcending this problem of didacticism explaining, like in the first paragraph, like in the first section that I read about his strange journey to his hometown. To certainly a lot of Indian readers, this may seem too obvious, or this may seem too intensely familiar. Maybe not to the reader outside of India, but there's still, even now, even while he's addressing it, I can feel a tinge of didacticism there. It's a descriptive mode that is not broken up really by novelistic narrative. So there's, I can see, while I was reading, I sense there was a problem here. But anyway, the problem would have been much, much greater had he been talking about this in the first place. At least he's telling someone who doesn't know about it that this is what my life was like when I was growing up. Otherwise, what is the reason really that he's talking about? And the person who's addressing this too is actually writing about these men and their lives, his friends, and the ways in which they've gone wrong in their public lives. But she's not interested in the background. She's not interested in what made these men. And so this is where he steps in and provides this kind of information. But he's also telling her, he's also trying to justify this horrendous act of abandonment. So he's also telling her what he thought of her world when he was in London. So again, it just felt like maybe it doesn't work for some readers, but while I was writing it seemed like this was the only way I could describe it.
My question is timeline. So much of the setting of the book is very present, and the events are obviously very familiar to all of us, but much of the story itself feels more rooted in the past. And so I didn't know, I just wanted to know if a lot of this was written in the years prior, and then you kind of layered in the more recent events, or whether this was all written in a flurry of pandemic frenzy.
I actually started writing before the pandemic, but certainly the lockdown helped me focus. And there were, I think roughly about 3,000 words of it were written at some point, like 5-6 years ago. And then they have to be completely altered. But it's actually interesting when you start a new book, even something like that can be a great challenge for you to think of way back into American life. You've already got 3,000. Maybe I'll write 2 more and then do 5. And you suddenly start telling yourself, maybe I'll reach 10 very soon. And so those words are always useful, but vast majority of it was written in 2 or 3 years of publication.
Awesome. We go. Someone over here.
Pankaj, thanks for everything and your generosity. So I'm curious, 2 parts question. Can you talk a little bit about the editorial process? You turn the draft into your editor. How does that work? And then also, how does that differ when you're working with fiction and nonfiction as far as working with an editor or publisher?
I think that nonfiction, particularly the last 2 books that I did, both were works of sexual history. That required, and I was very fortunate to have editors who were incredibly well informed about my subject. So they were able to make incredibly well-informed interventions into my text and say, I forgot to mention this, we should think about this and that. So that was really very useful, but also, I think it was really quite an intense process. And I think it took me about 3 or 4 months to put the whole thing in place. With this, much less so. There were some good suggestions of a line editing sort that came up, which almost all of which I work with. I'm very open. I just don't think that whatever I write to good print. A lot of people do. it has to be looked at by somebody else to tell me whether it was about. And if they say it doesn't, I would take that very seriously. I believe that book. But there wasn't so much of it. Do you feel it needed more?
Needed a firmer hand. But actually, real quick, one follow-up. Almost my follow-up. You said you take useful edits. Can you describe what might be an unuseful edit that you would not want to take?
In fiction?
I guess either one. Either one.
I think something that I actually, now that you ask me, I can't think of a useless suggestion. Everything is useful in some way or other. But there are some things that are more useful than others. I think, writing about like 19th century Europe, and somebody said, oh, you forgot to take into account the Spanish. I would say, well, that's not a useful suggestion because, Spain is not really part of the mainstream of 19th century European history. It's outside it. And there's some things you just have to exclude. You can't possibly write about it. So that's, I would say people make those decisions thinking, it can have a broader scope, can do more things. But then you also have to recognize your own limitations, right? You're not going to start a new chapter in your life learning about Spain in the 19th century and practically what you know. But they're often, I think people, when they should make those kinds of suggestions, they always have interests at heart. So I always listen carefully.
Well, thank you again for coming to speak. I have a question about, when you spoke to the MFA students before this, you mentioned your admiration for V.S. Naipaul, and one of the characters is also a great admirer of Naipaul's in a way that seems like an important device in the book, maybe connected to a kind of meta criticism about how women can and can't be written about in today's world. I was just leafing through your book to confirm and came across a line where Alia says, it's a very pre-Me Too book. You can't write about women that way anymore. So I'm wondering if you consider this book to be pushing back against those standards or to be playing with those standards, just how that sort of undercurrent figures into your own portrayals.
Thank you. Naipaul is someone I've written about a lot in my nonfiction reviews, introduced 2 volumes of his essays. I knew him personally. And for I think I would say 2 generations of writers from the subcontinent, and indeed elsewhere, he is a huge inspiration. But at the same time, he's a deeply problematic figure in many of his attitudes, especially towards women. And women characters in his novels are horrendous. They often end up suffering physical abuse, and people have pointed this out. And I think, I think he's one writer who can be perhaps actively misogyny. But when you have a writer who is so clearly inadequate at one level, but at the same time absolutely brilliant in talking about individual psychology of men, who writes really very compelling fiction about those men, can't draw women characters, writes very compelling essays about certain parts of the world, but not others. Becomes in his public pronouncements more and more of a crank, saying all kinds of outrageous things like women writers, I don't take them seriously, or various other pronouncements. But I think in this book, and I think it's also true in the lives of many people, for about 20, 25 years, he was a figure you had to argue against, you had to argue with. You had to see the world the way he saw it and then argue with him about it. So he was sort of unavoidable in many ways. So it felt to me, if I was going to write about the last 20 years, there was no way I could avoid his presence. Also because he became a mascot of globalization. He connected his own kind of, bootstrap narrative with story of global capitalism. It's like, look at me, where I come from, small little island in the middle of nowhere. Achievement, individual striving, this is available to everyone. He was not much interested in structural injustice or historical injustice. That was another way of arguing it. He was all about, if you haven't worked hard enough and if you fail, it's your problem. The world is not going to pay you attention. And, there's the weak lines of this that echo throughout the novel. And I've actually heard people say these things, or people quote those lines approvingly. They're very much sentiments that were widely embraced in the neoliberal era. If you fail, it's the individual's fault. It's not the fault of, the political or economic system. It's not to do with anything that happened in the past. It's not about historical injustices. It's the individual who's failed, really. So that I found ultimately a very pernicious sentiment. And again, these are things if you write about them in nonfiction, particularly when you praise the same writer and you write written about in different ways, you'll come across as someone who's trying to, basically take down someone who liked a long time back and put yourself in his place, or you get accused of all kinds of your motive. And whereas in fiction, there's a kind of broader way in which a novelist can make an appearance, where the novels are still very impressive, but the character is deeply problematic, especially in public.
Hi, thank you so much for visiting us tonight. The book opens with such a horrific scene, and I guess to learn that Virendra is the one following year sort of conducting this chaos was devastating. I was wondering if you knew that the book was going to open there from the start, or if that idea took shape at some point and you said this has to go in the book.
I was telling you about the 2,000 words that I wrote 5-6 years ago. That was the scene. Done very differently, without any idea, where it's going. So it was something taken out of there. I witnessed such a scene. Not in every particular described in the book. And I thought at some point, and to be honest, I did not witness just one scene at this time, but several scenes. And I felt at some point I could write about this because also it's a very complicated. Shocking as it may be to any reader, it's something that happened. It may be happening as we speak right now, as we stand here. The experience of degradation, systematic degradation. And again, I felt that there was a weird absence of literature that, you have incredibly successful people who are running, hedge fund banks and running Silicon Valley companies here. And they've come through this experience. They've come through this experience of humiliation. And there is this peculiar silence there. So, definitely I wanted to break that silence, but also really want to talk about what is it about this particular mode of social mobility, where you have to be made aware, first of all, of your degraded status. And then, you finally accept it in reality. What is this mode of initiation? It's not a great to answer that question, but certainly has intrigued me as a kind of neatly underwritten about backdrop to the Indian success story, which is in this country, it's all around us. And yet, we don't really know where these people come from, what has happened there, what happened there. So yes, I mean that was something that was written from the very beginning. That.
I think we have time for maybe two more. Right back in there.
Hi. Piggybacking off of an earlier question, I guess the main characters in the book to me felt very complete in the sense that they had multiple motivations, they had rich interior lives. So you saw them as victim, but also as so much more than that. So it effectively, your book opens with this sort of scene of degradation and humiliation. I guess I was wondering if you could speak to the ways in which you think that you were successful or not about creating that same rich interiority for your female characters, who we mostly see as sexual objects, like the blonde bobbing heads or the 10,000 bucks, or in servant roles like the mother, or even the love interest at the end seems to serve more as a tool for male spiritual and sexual transformation who likes to check social media. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I think the problem with characters like these is that their experience of women is extremely limited. That's the problem. Again, they come from very conservative families where women are essentially confined to the kitchen. That's what their role is, and they are, as you put it, they're largely sort of glorified servants for the rest of the family, and such is the mother of the narrator. There is hardly any kind of interaction. At least there wasn't. I think things have changed now. There's a lot more mixing that happens before you enter the world. But you could, back in the 80s, which is what this thing describes, you often simply do not meet women until you were well out of college, or you meet them on a social level. There was a lot of segregation. In some parts of India, that segregation still happens, but not in kind of major metropolitan cities. That fortunately has changed. So you come to women in relatively late in life, and most people around the world, and you come to them with an overheated sexual fantasies about them. And so developing healthy relationships with women is almost impossible for men. It requires a kind of root and branch transformation, which hardly any of them are willing to undertake. So I've seen like over the years, several men fail in their efforts to create enduring relationships because of this early, lack of exposure to, that whole world. They come to them after this experience of being fawned upon and attended to by their mothers, and when they become these, sexual creatures. And it's very difficult for them to kind of think about different ways in which they can be them. And that is what this book is describing. I mean, I think, obviously a criticism would be made of just how relatively, shallow the women characters are. But again, that's the problem. That's the risk you always take when you describe something, when you describe a different narrative from a particular subjective view. That all you can do is make the narrative regretful of the way he's behaved towards this particular person. But I think him arriving at some larger perspective or compassionate understanding would really, in a way, not work novelistically. And I think that's, unfortunately, this is the built-in limitation of a narrative like this, is that there'll be some characters that would be almost necessarily left undeveloped, because that's the way those characters are perceived by the main narrator. And perhaps there's a way to make them, come alive. Maybe another motive narrative, or maybe another narrator in the book who does that, but that would be a bigger book. I often toy with the idea of how about describing the same set of experiences and sequences using the voice of Alia, where she describes this book from her perspective back to us. That would be another book. And there she would be given her, then she would have the full control of her subject. And a lot more freedom. But as long as she's seen through this, very experienced eyes of that, she'll really remain this person who represents to him a certain kind of modernity that he's soon disillusioned by, and then, abandons her, runs away from her, finds the social media thing quite alienating. But he doesn't really go, he's not equipped to go beyond that and to understand anything more about it.
Good night. I have a question about the book and you. Does Arun, the main character, and you as the author are connected somehow? And if Arun doesn't resemble you in the book, who was the one who got inspired from to write about Arun?
Look, Arun, I've given him a couple of my experiences of living in the mountains and traveling in the mountains. But, a few bits about growing up in a small town, although his experiences are not mine there, but just the setting. The character who spurns the path leading to success decides to retreat. I've seen a lot of people do that. They go through the motions, they become very successful or potentially successful, and decide that life is not for them, and they want to do something different. They want to do, go and take up a small job somewhere, or become a translator, or become an editor in some small niche. And that's a very powerful impulse that runs through Indian society, which is the impulse of renunciation. It's still there, despite all the modernization that is happening, which makes people think that there's more to life than acquisition, than material goods or conventional goals of success. There is something to be said about living modestly in a clean place, with clean air, with clean water, and those are luxuries too. And a lot of people make those decisions, and sometimes in the middle of a very successful thriving career, leave everything, drop everything, and return to this, simple, small scale life. And again, I felt that renunciation, that impulse, felt like that's not something that I had seen described in fiction before. And yet at the same time, you remain exposed, like this character. You remain vulnerable to the temptations of that. In the end, he succumbs to it. So his is a shallow renunciation, but there are people who maintain that for decades on it.
Well, thank you very much, Pankaj. Look, there's Purcell in the back, and we'll be doing a little signing. Thanks so much.